Welcome to the very first episode of the podcast. Today we are starting with a strong guest who is not only a friend and a mentor, but also possesses one of the most impressive CVs that I've ever seen, and it's Dr. Dwayne Jackson. I'm still trying to figure out the direction of this podcast, but we'll just see where it goes. I couldn't think of a better person to start the show with. Dr. Jackson is a true scientific powerhouse. He holds a PhD in neurovascular physiology and went on to complete a postdoctoral fellowship at Yale University. He also served as a tenured professor at Western University's medical school. He applies that world-class medical and academic background to the real world of health and performance. He's also worked as a chief scientific officer and formulated supplements for many major supplement brands, and he's also the current director of nutrition education at Prescript. In short, when we talk to Dr. Jackson, we are getting some top-tier science. Today, we're diving into the essential blueprint for anybody looking to live a healthier lifestyle, focusing on the fundamentals of nutrition. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Dwayne Jackson. Okay, so basically, I want this podcast to be a starting point for somebody in their fitness journey, right? They're just starting to be aware, they want to eat healthier, they want to start training, just some actionable things that people can start to do, right? So one of the first questions that I had for you, and I can give my opinion as well, but when you see somebody and they want to be more conscious of their diet in particular, do you think that it is most effective for them to jump to tracking calories right away? Or do you think it is more worthwhile for them to just do something like portion control?
I always start with portion control, 3 square meals a day, because most people are they'll come into you eating, 1 or 2 meals a day. If you can get them to eat 3 square meals a day, fill the plate with, vegetables, high quality protein, and a good starch, give them some education on what those are, then getting them to eat those whole foods throughout the day is going to be the best starting point. As you know, you'll see the needle move pretty quickly in people that haven't been doing this for any period of time.
Yeah. And do you think, do you have certain clients that do come to you and will make them track initially because you know that they have the ability or it won't stress them out?
Yeah. So the people that have that come to me that have been, working with diet that hasn't worked in the past, I generally will give them a dietary framework and have them track throughout that framework, really for the most part, for things that they are eating that are off script, that are off out of that framework. Because generally speaking, I like to give them at the front end, regardless of who I'm working with and what their experience is, a framework that already fits within their macros and micronutrient needs. So that they don't have to overthink it in terms of, working on their phone to make things work out. Once we get that developed, I start pushing the tracking more so for tracking things like fiber and micronutrition because, there's different needs for different folks. And depending on the foods that they decide to choose within the framework, we may or may not be meeting those micronutrient needs, which is probably one of the biggest problems I see in most coaching diets.
Mm-hmm. And you kind of already answered my next question, but when somebody is tracking and starts to track, do you think that there's 2 targets that they should shoot for initially rather than just focusing on all of the micronutrients and protein, carbs, and fats? Do you think they should focus on protein at first, focus on getting enough fiber and then go from there? Or even say omega-3s, do you think there's a few targets that they should shoot for initially?
Depending on the population. So right off the bat for everybody, my biggest target is fiber. Protein's been really, really banged out in the industry. So, even though people have trouble getting enough protein in, we can give them the guidelines to do so, but really their level of hunger, satiety, and everything else is going to dictate how much protein they eat. So, you want to make sure you're pushing them over time on getting their protein intake in. And if they're tracking it, you'll be able to get a good idea of what that is. But fiber is one of the ones that gets skipped a lot. And so a lot of people will eat their meat, but not eat their veg. And so if we can get them to get that soluble fiber in, then we can start working on understanding where their digestive health sits. Because if they can't handle the fiber, then we need to make sure that we're giving them, protocols that support digestive health.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people, they focus on protein. But if you have poor gut health and you're not focusing on fiber, then you're not actually assimilating that protein properly, right?
You got it. Yeah. That's as you know, with the people you've worked with, a lot of them will talk about, the fact they have gas and these types of issues, especially when they get fiber on board. But what I've found and what the literature really says is that protein is kind of hard on the guts. And if you aren't in a good state of digestive health, then, and you're eating, 40, 50 grams of protein per meal, which is usually necessary to get the amount of protein we need in a day, especially in 3 meals, then they'll find that they have stinky gas. And when we see, when we're bloated and we have stinky farts per se, then that tells us that there's a high likelihood that those amino acids aren't getting assimilated. Like you said, they're making it down to the colon and they're getting fermented by protein-loving bacteria, which are okay in the commensal sense when we have enough good bacteria down there. But when we don't, then we start supporting the overgrowth of these protein-loving bacteria. And then we have issues with gas that's associated with protein that's exacerbated by the fiber intake.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have this issue because you see it all over Instagram. Everybody's preaching protein, but there's not a lot. There are people now preaching about fiber, but it's definitely not talked about enough because even myself in high school and university, you're just focused on protein and you realize like, why am I farting all of the time? And you're not supporting your gut. Like that's really what it is. And when you are supporting your gut with enough fiber, you're able to assimilate these nutrients a lot better and you're able to actually perform better, both physically and cognitively.
Absolutely. And what's nice about fiber is you can modulate the speed at which the carbohydrates enter the bloodstream. Everybody these days seems to be really, concerned about glucose spiking, insulin spiking, and all these different things. And although those are just natural consequences of eating carbohydrates, in a lot of sense, we can slow down that response and extend it, that glycemic response, utilizing fibers in the diet, mixed meals per se, and really don't have to overthink it, right? When you start using whole foods to get your carbohydrate intake, because then you end up having some fiber follow, as well as in your vegetable intake, fiber follows with that. So you don't have to overthink it when you start going back to what we talked about at the beginning, the basics of filling a plate.
100%. And back to whole food. So if somebody's eating a diet that's diverse in plant proteins, animal protein, plants and fruits, do you think they need to consume a multivitamin? Do you think that is something that everybody should take, or is it specific populations?
That's a great question. So it depends on the caloric intake. So for example, if you have someone come to you that's, 135 pounds and they want to lose 10 or 15 pounds, and it's a healthy weight loss for that, the calorie intake is going to be relatively low, even at 135 pounds when we start looking at, maintenance calories. So as caloric intake goes down, micronutrient intake also follows. Generally, what ends up happening is we clamp protein. So it doesn't matter what we weigh. We end up, keeping protein at, that 135 grams per day if we're doing 1 gram per pound. But the rest of everything falls off. So it's real important to really, that's, the essence of tracking in my practice is to see where we're at with micronutrient intake, especially in the face of caloric restriction. And, in females in general, but females that are menopausal, perimenopausal, postmenopausal, calcium intake is something that I see falling off the map. And this is one of the most important micronutrients or macro minerals that we need in the diet to support bone health in this population. So, and when people stop drinking or eating or drinking dairy products, then it becomes real difficult to get, all your calcium from, green vegetables and these types of things. And that's where supplementation really can play a big role, or drinking a glass of milk can really top things up at 123 calories or whatever it is for a glass of, 1% milk.
100%. I think a lot of people they go into a calorie deficit and they just think it's all about eating less food. But they don't have any regard for food volume. It's like, you don't actually have to eat less food. Yes, you want to eat less calories, but you don't have to eat less food. And that's where, people run into malnutrition, is because they're reducing all their food intake. So therefore they're reducing the amount of micronutrients that they're getting, but you need to be eating fruits, eating vegetables. And it actually helps you not only, it not only provides you with more micronutrients, it also helps with satiety, right?
100%. And it's funny too. When we start cutting calories in my world, I generally just tell my clients, you can eat as much vegetables ad libitum, like as you need, pile it up. Right. The biggest problem is though, if we don't have good gut health going into the actual diet, then it becomes difficult to eat the amounts of, those good vegetables with good soluble fiber that help the digestive process in abundance, right? It's really a problem. So that's why, at the front end of any diet, it's really important to be able to assess someone's digestive health. And once we have a good grip on that, then really that's probably the hardest part covered in terms of creating satiety when we start going into caloric restriction, like you said, because we can increase volume. And the beautiful part about every meal that we make, and this is something that a lot of my clients are like, whoa, I never even thought of that, is you can make pretty much anything into a soup. And so, that whole chicken, sweet potato, broccoli, carrots, and kale, say, for example, you can take that whole thing, throw it in a pot of water when it's all cooked. All right. And then put in some good bouillon in there, mix it all together. And now you got a soup that's going to be first pre-digests all those fibers. So they go through the system nice and easily. And it also then boosts hydration and expands the volume even further. So we can, so like you said, it's not necessarily eating less food, right? It's taking some of the calories away that we're trying to do when we go into caloric restriction.
It's funny. I've been doing that more recently. Like I stopped eating soups probably 3 years ago. I used to eat them all the time when I was a kid. But then I don't know why. I just kind of, you get on your chicken and rice and whatnot. And like I started adding more soups in recently. I'll just go to, Farm Boy or any grocery store and buy like a soup with a lot of vegetables. And then I'll just buy a rotisserie chicken, toss in a bunch of chicken, and then get a piece of sourdough, put a little bit of butter on it. And it's like it might be like 500-600 calories and you are full for so long.
And beautifully hydrated because all of those minerals are in the soup. You don't lose anything. It's not like you're boiling veg and then taking them out of the water. So everything stays within it. And then you get true hydration without even thinking about, taking an element or, right? So you don't even think about it. You're getting enough sodium, you're getting everything else. And you're right. It can be as easy as heading out to Whole Foods, Farm Boy, whatever your grocery store is, either buying a pre-made soup that's relatively high quality, right? Try to stay away from the canned stuff as possible. But I mean, even then, if that's what you can afford, that works. But as high quality as possible, or just buy some broth. You can buy broth, salt it up, pepper it up, throw in all your spices, go crazy on that. Throw your chicken breast in that you've already cooked. Right. And then you can throw veg in that's not cooked. And even can be frozen veg. And you've got yourself a wicked meal. It's high volume.
Yeah. No, and it'll keep you full versus, you just have plain chicken breast, rice, and you're starving in about 2 hours.
And it's really boring. And that's, with a lot of the people I work with, it's the factor of like sitting down and eating the same thing over and over again can become a real problem for someone who's ate with a lot of variety. And so in these times when we're in calorie restriction, having different modalities for using the same foods, makes life a lot more simple. Even down to, when you have your oats, blueberries, protein powder, flax, chia, and all that stuff mixed up, you can make overnight oats. You can throw the whole thing in the blender and have it as a shake, right? You can eat them all separately. It just depends on what you want. Same foods, different way to present them, much easier to tolerate over time.
Yeah, I think people neglect that aspect of eating. Like they eat the same thing over and over again, but there's different ways in which satiety can be achieved, right?
Absolutely. The psychological aspect of eating, right? Yeah, and it's funny too because there's a whole psychosocial process in this thing, right? That plays the biggest role in success. And so if you're sitting down to your, plastic dish of rice, chicken, broccoli, and your family sitting down to a nice big meal of whatever that may be, that social aspect goes away. But if if your family's not interested in eating, the typical, diet meals, you can be really creative, like we were talking about, by creating soups, by spicing things up, by, simply changing the way it's presented, and it will make 100% difference in how people respond to the food in front of them.
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of shifting gears a little bit. if somebody's again starting to get into their fitness and nutrition journey, do you think that we have already talked about a multivitamin. Do you think there's like, top 2 to 3 supplements that they should be looking at, whether it's say creatine, vitamin D, magnesium? Like what would be your top 2 to 3 that you think that most people should be taking?
Yeah, generally speaking, I'll recommend taking a multi at the front end. Then we can log the multi when we get into like logging into chronometer or carbon coach or whatever they're using. Once we start logging those, we can see where we've had an overabundance of vitamin intake, especially in the face of the food we're eating. So multivitamin I generally have at the front end. If we're logging, I can take a look and actually fill in the blanks. If it's, a certain B vitamin or an array of B vitamins that we need to put in there, we can just simply focus on B vitamins. But vitamins in general tend to be in the first process. Absolutely. Omega-3s, I do like to have on board for most of my clients. We tend to not eat enough omega-3, but if people are eating fish, even like canned fish, like sardines, mackerel, these types of things, we're probably getting enough omega-3. And when we present these diets to them, a lot of times we don't get enough omega-6, even though, the big story out there right now is, the American diet has this, that, and the other thing, 15-to-1 omega-6 to omega-3, and it's inflammatory. Well, we need omega-6. We can make omega-9, right? And we need omega-3. Those are both essential. So the balance between omega-3 and omega-6 is really the most important factor, not so much getting rid of all your omega-6. So in giving omega-3s, I generally will tell them to take around 3 grams a day. And then I'll take a look again when we track, even if they're not tracking regularly, I'll even put their diet into a tracker and look at where their omega-6s sit. And then I can add in things like pumpkin seeds and this kind of stuff to get omega-6s up. The beauty of doing that process by having it so it's modular and you can plug them in, it allows you to control where the actual fats are coming from as opposed to supplementing them all. So, if the person likes fish, like I said, omega-3s generally will be negligible whether we need them or not. There's a lot of omega-3 if we're eating cold water fish like salmon or char, these trout, these type of things. So, so omega-3s, yeah, definitely. Magnesium, 100%. Yeah. Magnesium, 400 milligrams elemental at the end of the day. I tend to promote for everybody. That is what's recommended for, recommended daily is 400 milligrams of elemental magnesium. So we're going to have probably in our diet a little more than that. But if you ain't pooping your pants, then you don't have too much on board. You're okay. Yeah. And, magnesium is a big one. And vitamin D3, if we have D3 measurements from, their labs, and they're showing symptoms of, lack of energy, lack of recovery, hormonal issues, and we have D3 measurements, generally we'll see D3 being, either low normal or actually below normal. And that's just typically because our exposure to sun is a lot less these days. Yeah. And so, we need that on board. So that's kind of that'd be my cores for the diet.
For vitamin D, do you recommend that most people would take a K2 with that as well?
Absolutely. Yeah. If we're using, if we're going to use a D3, we might as well throw in K2 so that we're, balancing the whole calcium homeostasis thing. It's not, heading toward the vessels. This becomes really important in today's, ideology in the fitness industry because people are just mega dosing vitamin D3. Yeah. So K2, helps keep the calcium directed toward bone and connective tissue as opposed to into our vessels. Yeah. So important. Usually I recommend 60 to 120 micrograms a day, despite whatever the D3 is. That's going to be more than enough of K2.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think like using Chronometer, starting with a multi, like you can kind of over time see, what they're deficient in and what they're not getting enough of. And you can make changes in their diet first. And then if you do need to supplement, like you're saying for some of them, then you add the supplement in. You don't necessarily need to start with supplements. Like,
absolutely not. In fact, supplements, if you create a dietary framework and you're presenting it to, a client that's, that really just wants to push the needle on their health, they have like 30 to 60 pounds to lose and everything else. And then, they're paying you as a coach. And then you lap on top of that major food costs. It's going to change because they're eating whole foods, right?
Yeah.
And then you put on top of that, $300 of the supplements, which is really easy to get to. What
Hmm.
happens usually is psychologically, the whole thing falls apart because we've got this, I guess it's an improper way of thinking that supplements are actually the most important factor. And so it's kind of one of those like, well, why bother doing this thing if I can't afford this omega-3, or why bother even doing this if I can't afford the vitamins? I'll
Yeah.
start when I, have a new job and I can afford $300 of supplements. So supplements, they're the icing on the cake. We
Yeah.
really, as you know, I formulate supplements for numerous different companies. They have lots of merit. I do support it big time. If you go to my page, I got lots on that. But if you ain't got your diet sorted out, and you don't have your sleep sorted out, and you don't have your personal life even sorted out for that matter,
Yeah.
then the supplements aren't going to really raise the bar for you until you kind of have everything else kind of in line.
Yeah. And you can, you can have the perfect diet and the perfect supplement plan. And, but if you're always stressed, then no wonder your digestion is in the tank, right? Like it's, the biopsychosocial approach, like everything influences the gut.
Absolutely. And yeah, the stress part of it is a real big one. And that's why, when you're consulting with your clients, I'm sure you do it too. You want to get a grip on how stressful their life is and how much their sleep supports it, because even training stress, even though it's a eustress or good stress, it
Yeah.
becomes a bad stress in the face of high allostatic load or high levels of external stress that are, driving us crazy. So we won't recover. Chances of, eating propensity goes down. So we miss meals. And then we have low micronutrient intake as well as macronutrient intake. Then sleep suffers, so does recovery, and it just keeps on looping. So, yeah, it's
Yeah.
real important to get this. The stress thing is massive, right? That's the
Yeah.
big
No,
buzzword these days.
I think the biggest thing for people starting out is, you don't need to jump to tracking right away. Just focus on eating whole food, get lots of vegetables, get lots of fruit, make sure you're prioritizing protein at each meal, and, just try to minimize stress outside of that. And then you can dive into tracking later, but we don't need to jump right to tracking if, the rest of your life is just chaos, because it's only going to
Brilliant.
add to it, right?
Exactly. And
Yeah.
I go as far as with a lot of people that come to me and they want to work with me. And, I kind of get a grip on where they're sitting in their whole, like, lifestyle, diet, the whole thing.
Yeah.
I'll say to them, listen, if you want to move the needle real fast on your sleep, your recovery, and weight loss, just literally shop around the outside aisles, eat whole food on your plate, make sure that you've got half your plate covered in vegetables. And at the front end, who even cares? Just mix up 3 colors so you get a lot of different polyphenols, but just, mix them up. Grab yourself a hunk of meat, throw that on the plate to take up a quarter of it, and then fill in the other quarter with a good starch, sweet potato. Usually I tell them quinoa. If they're really stuck on white rice, we can use white rice. But that alone, that plate, if you do that 3 times a day, no matter what weight you are, no matter who you are, you will improve your health if you aren't already doing that. And
Yeah.
if you're not already doing that, it's probably why you have issues with maintaining a healthy body weight.
100%. 100%. We're at our, just past our 20-minute mark. So we'll
That's
cap it
perfect.
there. But, yeah, I appreciate, you chatting with me, and we'll definitely have some more episodes coming soon.
Awesome.